Hey everyone, Kelsey the Counselor here, and I wanted to talk to you today about trauma, traumatic events, and life. So feel free to pop in the comments below if you find any of this information helpful, if you have any questions, or also I'd love to hear from you and you can email me at hello@kelseythecounselor.com. We have a whole bunch of free resources at www.kelseythecounselor.com as well that you're welcome to check out. So without further ado, let's talk about trauma, traumatic events, and life. So first of all, when we talk about trauma, I want to acknowledge that it is different from the traumatic event. The traumatic event is what happens outside of us. This is the story of what we would tell people if we've experienced something. It's the narrative of the things that happened, and this is the traumatic event. Trauma, on the other side, is what we experience inside of us. So the traumatic event outside triggers the trauma response inside. And this is an important distinction because we can never truly know someone's trauma by hearing about their traumatic event. We can have a sense that certain difficulties might be hard for most people, but what might be difficult for me might not be difficult for you, and vice versa. So if I tell you about some trauma that I've experienced, by telling you about the traumatic event, you might dismiss it and go, oh, well, that's not really a big deal, but perhaps it is for me. And perhaps this traumatic event has triggered the trauma inside of me that I'm living with. But the way we can really understand someone's experience of trauma is by listening to their story of what their experience is inside. So the traumatic event outside is a story and narrative of what happened, but we can't really understand until we listen to the trauma of what that's triggered and what they're living with inside of them. This is important in another way as well, because sometimes we talk about little t trauma or big T trauma. And I don't really love this distinction because, again, if we're talking about the traumatic event, we might be able to say, okay, this is a bigger event or a smaller event, but we can't know the impact to one person. I'm going to tell you a personal story. I had a concussion a number of years ago, and people would say, oh my gosh, how did you get it? So silly. I was getting into my car and I bumped the temple of my head on that bar above the door when I was getting into my car. I literally was getting in my car, bumped my temple and into my seat. I felt a little funny, no big deal. Holy smokes, I had to take off life for a year. I had to postpone my schooling. I had to leave my job. I had to go to a treatment center out of town for 6 weeks because of this funny little bump. It came out later that because of things I experienced earlier in my life, a significant head injury trauma was still living inside of me. And so this tiny little bump on my head cascaded this significant concussion. I was stuttering, which I've never done before in my life. I could barely walk. I couldn't live under big lights. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't function for, I think it was over a year. Obviously, I'm healthy and well and did the recovery I need. But again, if I told someone, oh, I bumped my head when I was getting in my car, we would go, oh, that's little t trauma. Is that even little t trauma? But the impact was monumental. And so in the same way, we can't truly understand a person's experience of trauma by listening to the story of the traumatic event. We need to listen to both to truly understand it. So what does this have to do with life? Well, sometimes I wonder if the word trauma is actually synonymous with life. There's no one I know truly well, deeply, that hasn't experienced some significant difficulty in their life that has led to a trauma response inside of them. This doesn't mean that I think everybody's experiencing or living with post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder. I just think it's an acknowledgement that sometimes in life, we experience big events that can be traumatic. And I really want to normalize that experience of trauma response inside of us. So that's what I wanted to talk about today with trauma, traumatic event, distinguishing the difference between the two of them, and then talking about how most people in life experience something that is traumatic. There's lots of reasons why people can recover more quickly than others, and we won't get into that today. I'll definitely post another video about that later. But I wanted to start this conversation about trauma. It seems like such a big and heavy word, and it is. And yet, again, people I know who I know well in life, I don't know anyone who hasn't gone through a traumatic experience. So be compassionate to yourself, be compassionate to others, and know that we're all in this thing called life together. We're all experiencing a human experience. And I don't know anyone that gets out of life alive. And I don't know anyone that goes through life without experiencing traumatic events and experiencing some sense of trauma. So on that note, please feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Again, we have tons of resources that are free to you at kelseythecounselor.com, and you're welcome to email me at hello@kelseythecounselor.com. Take care, everyone. Until next time. Bye.